It's believed the 51-year-old woman driving a silver Cressida was turning left onto the Pacific Highway when she hit the front of a coal truck travelling in the next lane. The driver of the truck swerved to avoid impact, but the car slammed into the side of the heavy vehicle. Rescue crews worked for more than half an hour to free the trapped woman, who suffered serious leg injuries in the accident. Traffic was brought to a standstill as the rescue helicopter dodged power lines to land on the highway. The woman was flown to Royal Newcastle Hospital, where she remains in a serious condition. The driver of the truck escaped injury.
The closed cockpit ultralight came down in scrub about 30 metres from the edge of a gravel runway. There were no eyewitnesses, but a local youth alerted emergency services after hearing the sound of a crash. Flight instructor John Bryant was among the first to begin the search.
We never heard the aircraft go down ourselves, but we certainly came down to have a look to see what we could find.
What did you find?
Well, the aircraft and wreckage, you just see it now.
And how were the crew?
They were both out of the aircraft. The student pilot was walking around. He seemed reasonably okay, but the instructor himself was in a state of shock.
62-year-old instructor Col Hurst of Merriweather suffered fractures to his arm and ribs as well as possible internal injuries. He was taken to Wallsend District Hospital, where his condition is described as stable. The student, 25-year-old Peter Moore of Warnervale, was unhurt. Although he declined to be interviewed, he did say that the pair escaped thanks to Mr Hurst's flying skills. It's understood the 12-month-old Australian-made ultralight developed engine problems during a routine training flight. The instructor took over the controls and turned towards the runway as the aircraft lost power. The Currumbong airfield is home to the Avondale College Flying School. It's not associated with the ultralight school operated by Mr Hurst, although he does rent a hangar from the school to house his aircraft. The accident is under investigation by the Bureau of Air Safety. It's suspected the engine failure was caused by a blocked fuel line.
How would you describe them?
Terrible.
This hotel here, were you?
Just to come with the car over there. They got underneath the car.
You were in the car?
Yeah, me and a wife were there. Just
in the car at the time?
Yeah.
What did it feel like in the car?
just very bad. She knows anything, that's all.
Oh, it just came underneath the buildings. Everything just flew off the walls, and it just, I don't know.
Did your building collapse?
No, we were really lucky.
We're setting up our command posts at the major incident sites at the Workers Club, at Kmart and these places, in Beaumont Street. And thanks very much, and I've got work to do.
Well, owing to the severe structural problems at Royal Newcastle Hospital, the Mater has taken over as the casualty hospital for the city. About 50 patients have been brought here by a fleet of ambulances. We understand, however, that only 2 of those patients are seriously hurt. Although the Mater Hospital suffered small fractures in older wings and power shortages to the casualty section, it became the disaster headquarters for the entire region. Ambulances took some patients to outer hospitals to make room for others coming in, but due to the holiday period, the hospital had an abundance of bed space. Hunter Health Board Chief Executive Owen James confirmed the early injury toll, but said plans were in hand to cope with many more patients if needed.
The majority of them have minor injuries. There are 2 with more serious injuries, such as leg and chest injuries. These patients are being looked after at this hospital. In the event that more patients do come, we have arrangements which will allow them to be sent on to Wallsend. We've already filled up Western Suburbs Hospital and Maitland Hospital. If the worst comes to the worst, we have a capability to relocate people to Sydney hospitals.
A care flight helicopter remained on standby at the hospital to take more seriously hurt patients to Sydney. It's understood 2 wings of the Royal Newcastle Hospital may be beyond repair, but even worse news is that the new $140 million John Hunter Hospital at Rankin Park may also have suffered even more crippling structural damage. The quake twisted the near-complete building along the length of its central corridor. There are fears that the quake may have effectively broken the hospital's back.
We've been here for about 3 hours. As you can see around you, there's extensive cracking to masonry and render. But until such time as we get a structural engineer's inspection, probably tomorrow, it may be many weeks before we realise the full extent.
This crack that runs virtually the length of the corridor here, if that's structural, what will that mean for the hospital?
Well, in terms of time, very difficult to say. Certainly we will have to, any damaged brickwork we'll have to remove and rebuild. So it is devastating at this stage.
BHP's steel plant was shut down soon after the quake. A spokesman for the company said the plant lost power during the crisis and workers immediately adopted an emergency plan. The plant's 78 coke ovens were vented, releasing volatile gases which would normally circulate throughout the steel processing plant. The effect of the flames and smoke billowing from the steelworks added a nightmarish backdrop to the chaos of the earthquake. Despite the spectacle, a spokesman reported that no one was injured on the site. However, 2 workers were hurt at the nearby brick manufacturing plant at Mayfield. Another fire at Tyres Hill Technical College gave firefighters some anxious moments following reports that there were people trapped in the building, along with dangerous chemicals stored in laboratories. Firefighters using breathing apparatus confirmed that the block was deserted and the blaze was brought under control within about half an hour.
The biggest hurdle facing emergency services today was lack of communication after power and telephone lines were cut. An emergency mobile unit powered by a generator was urgently erected to cope with the hundreds of calls needed to coordinate the biggest rescue and emergency crisis this region has ever seen. Denison Strait became a mobile hospital with more than 40 extra ambulances from Sydney and the Central Coast giving assistance to Hunter medics. Today's quake had no respect for those dedicated to save other people's lives. The ambulance building itself was severely damaged and all operations were forced to be held outside. The State Disaster Plan is a mammoth operation calling on all the state's emergency services, including police, fire brigades, hospitals, ambulances, state rescue services, mobile communication and casualty and accident teams. But emergency services say they always had the situation under control today. 5 helicopters and scores of ambulance vehicles were on standby, with medics wasting no time to offer vital services at accident scenes.
One of the first services hit by today's tremor was the electricity. Almost all power to the Hunter Valley was cut. However, emergency crews restored electricity suburb by suburb. Most services were restored by 3 this afternoon. But individual homes without power can now ring 560 560 for assistance. That number again, 560 560. The gas company has been monitoring the pressure in the mains and says there's been no pressure drop throughout the day, indicating there have been no gas leaks as a result of the quake. The Hunter Water Board appealed to the public to conserve water so the treatment plants would not back up with untreated effluent. Those plants weren't operating while power was down. The Australian Seismological Centre in Canberra measured the quake at 5.5 on the Richter scale. Scientists say it was probably the result of underground pressure on a shallow geological fault. It's because the fault was so shallow that damage has been so widespread. This earthquake was not the result of continental plates sliding over one another. That was the cause of this year's San Francisco quake. Newcastle does not lie on a major intercontinental fault line. This quake, say scientists, was caused by compression in the Earth's crust breaking up under pressure. The lack of a seismograph in the Newcastle area means the exact location of the epicentre is difficult to calculate, although early reports place the quake centre at just 5 kilometres west of the city. Reports of structural and property damage can be registered with the police or state emergency services. The Disaster Welfare Group has organised emergency accommodation for those people who cannot sleep in their homes tonight. Details are available from the Cardiff office of the Department of Family and Community Services. The number to call there is 546688. That's 546688. The department has also set up an emergency welfare centre at Broadmeadow High School. SES units from around the valley have converged today on the city to assist. Tents have been erected in Cameron Park, Hamilton for elderly people, a scene repeated around the city. But social security offices will be closed tomorrow due to a computer breakdown. The state government has announced relief measures will be available for the victims of today's tremor. Financial assistance and replacement of essential household items to restore homes to a safe condition will be available from the Department of Family and Community Services. Small business loans of $25,000 at 6% will be available for those operations unable to arrange finance through normal commercial channels. Councils will be reimbursed the full cost of emergency repairs and then subsidised for permanent restoration work. Churches and voluntary non-profit organisations will also be eligible for concessional loans for the restoration of essential facilities.
As night fell, rescue crews worked tirelessly to use the last available light, but all the hope in Newcastle could not hold back the darkness, and emergency lighting grids were brought in. A search of the rubble on the right-hand side of the Workers' Club failed to find any more survivors. Rescuers then consulted with engineers to remove the twisted steel and crushed concrete without causing a further collapse. Traxcavators from across the industrial areas of the city were brought in to begin the clean-up and clear a path to enter the rest of the building. Newcastle City Council offered trucks and drivers to remove the rubble. 5 trucks provided a non-stop shuttle service, removing tons of debris in hours. It's now early morning. Rescue officers have decided to abandon their dig and wait until daylight hours. Meanwhile, other officers are working their way through the rubble, trying to find any more survivors. At midnight, 60 police were briefed as they headed out for a 12-hour shift. Most of them called in from leave to relieve other officers who had worked throughout the day. Normally only 5 officers patrol the city streets at night, but the boost in staff lifted morale. While across the city, State Emergency Service and Fire Brigade crews worked to remove dangerous or cracked walls from houses and shops that had been damaged. This house in Cleary Street, Hamilton, lost only a small section of its roof in the quake, but the wall had become unstable and could have crashed down on surrounding houses. An eerie feeling also fell over the city, with the central business district completely deserted of all but police and service personnel assigned to traffic barriers and shop protection.
Ulrich Burstein received a new kidney 4 months ago. Hopes for a new healthy life, which was to take him off dialysis machines, were dashed when his immunity resistance plummeted. Mr. Burstein contracted a number of viruses which left him weak and forced him back onto dialysis and into intensive care. He was about to be connected to a dialysis machine at the Royal Newcastle Hospital when the earthquake hit and power was suddenly cut off. He was rushed to the Wannsee Dialysis Centre at Charlestown, but they too had a power failure. Relatives say all hope for a recovery had been relinquished prior to the earthquake, but they say a few precious hours had been robbed by the urgent hospital transfer.
Melissa Thurlow of the Swansea Belmont Surf Lifesaving Club and Penny Doust of the Fingal Bay Club will join 14 teammates to take on the Pride of New Zealand in an 18-event test match tomorrow. Encompassing water events as well as onshore contests, it's believed to be the first time that a New South Wales women's team will be up against an international outfit in Australia. Melissa Thurlow has an outstanding record at state and national level and will be pretty busy at Queenscliff Beach, being involved in no less than 7 events. And the time in between each event could have an effect on her overall performance.
Well, it'll be pretty important because you're really tired after doing one event, and since the points count so much, it'll be really hard. Probably need more rest than we're going to get.
Penny Doust will keep her feet on terra firma, and with the conditions bound to be a little softer at Queenscliff than in Auckland, she's fairly confident of victory in the sprints and the beach relays.
Well, hopefully, it doesn't really worry me personally, but if the sand's soft, I'd prefer the soft sand. The heavier girls can't run on it. So.
And Penny isn't too concerned with her own performance, but more of the team's effort in general.
I think this is more of a team performance rather than individual performance, but I will, of course, be trying to upgrade my individual standards. But I think team winning would be more important this weekend, for sure.
Mr Greiner, accompanied by Health Minister Peter Collins, cut short his holiday in Hawaii to fly into Newcastle this morning. Both men had been unaware of the extent of damage to the city.
The far end of Maui in Hawaii, I don't have any conception of what might have happened. In a sense, it's more widespread than I might have thought, but on the other hand, not as extreme as it might have been, except for the Workers' Club situation.
After a tour of the damaged sections of Royal Newcastle Hospital, Mr Collins announced that both the York and North Wings and probably Wheeler House would be demolished and not replaced.
It means that the North Wing and the York Wing at Royal Newcastle Hospital will need to be demolished because at the moment they're unsafe for occupation. They would require such reconstruction as to virtually cost the same as building a new hospital anyway. And therefore it's very likely that when the structural engineer's advice is in, it will be for almost immediate demolition.
Patients from those wings were evacuated and transferred to nearby hospitals soon after the quake struck. With those wings closed and A Block at the Mater out of commission, the valley is down 200 beds. The Hunter Area Health Service is looking at contracting surgeons into private hospitals throughout the valley to cope with the shortage. It's also hoped the nearly completed John Hunter Hospital at Rankin Park will be brought into commission in 5 months' time.
The area with the 500 beds coming online at the new John Hunter Hospital was going to have a surplus capacity anyway. The question that we are now looking at is how quickly we can bring John Hunter Hospital online.
The 500-bed hospital was also damaged by the quake, but unlike the Royal and Mater, it sustained no structural problems. However, $10 million will be spent repairing the building for service. According to the Minister, the state government will do all possible to ensure health services in the valley are not disrupted.
So let's say that there is no risk to the continuity of health services in the Hunter because of the time of year when this has happened. We've got capacity elsewhere in the system. Indeed, right at the moment, we've got surplus capacity. If additional funds need to be made available, then we'll get a request from the area and we will process that request. But I really don't see the Hunter area going without, simply because funds may not be available from within their own budget at the moment.
Although most of the debris and rubble at the Newcastle Workers Club had been cleared overnight, the tragedy which struck there yesterday morning was still apparent.
Well, it's a shock. When you walk in there, you see the real extent of nature's power, and I guess the only thing one can be grateful for is that by circumstance there were fewer people rather than more people.
Mr Greiner spoke with the men in charge of the rescue operation and, like Mr Collins, had nothing but praise for the men and women who worked through the night in search of survivors.
It's a tremendous blow, not only to the people concerned, but to Newcastle as a city. As I say, the great thing is that Newcastle seems to be responding in a very positive way, and that's the least I guess we could expect.
The Premier has promised the state government will assist the city in any way possible, but he stressed it will be a number of weeks before a financial estimate can be made and assistance allocated.
We've got to make sure that over the next few weeks, and it'll be a matter of weeks, even longer, before we can assess all of the damage, and each case has to be treated ultimately individually, both in engineering terms and in terms of assessment for insurance and so on. So it's not an easy task because the damage is really surprisingly widespread.
With police barriers everywhere and buildings cordoned off, the Premier was able to see as he drove through the city just what nature had dished out. It's an eerie feeling. Streets usually crowded with people are now deserted, and buildings which have weathered for decades are little more than rubble. But out of the destruction comes some good, and like the Prime Minister yesterday, Mr Greiner praised the community which has banded together.
I'm really just delighted with the spirit of the response, both the spirit of Newcastle and the spirit of the response of all the organisations that have been involved in dealing with the tragedy.
Jodie McKay reporting for NBN News.
Well, Tracy, no more bodies were found overnight, although the search is continuing for perhaps half a dozen people who are unaccounted for who are missing, although it's not certain that they are in the Workers' Club. Senior Constable Darryl Oakley is here in charge on the scene. Darryl, are you expecting to find more people in there?
Well, there are still a number of people that are unaccounted for. Yes, we do expect to find people still there. Alive or dead, I don't know.
Do you have any hope that they would be still alive?
We hope they are alive, but who knows? I mean, miracles still happen. We look at San Francisco and places like that. There was people found alive there, so we always hold hope that we might find somebody else alive.
So what procedure are you undertaking now?
We're removing the floor section that collapsed where the bulk of the people were trapped initially. Once that's removed, diggers will come in, we'll take the excess rubble away, and then we'll send the rescue team in and we'll do it by hand then.
Thanks, Senior Constable. Back to you, Tracy. No, Tracy, no more bodies have been brought out of the club up to this stage, although the search is continuing for a half a dozen, perhaps even more people who I believe could be caught inside the rubble. Half a dozen people at least are still missing. But of course the clean-up's going on much further afield as well. We have Chief Inspector Ian Park with us to tell us what the situation is like in the CBD.
At the present moment, a survey is taking place throughout the central business district by engineers, and we're finding that there is a lot more structural damage than we thought that there was. And we're requesting people to stay right out of the area until we give them some notice.
You want everyone kept out?
We have made some requests for the owners of businesses or the managers of businesses to come to their business and check their safety of their stock and premises. However, we don't want a whole lot of people coming in expecting to take their property away.
So single individuals in single cars will be permitted?
That's correct. However, if if the property's got to be removed from their premises, we want it to be done in an orderly manner under direction of the police, and they'll be notified.
All right, thanks very much, Chief Inspector. Back to you, Tracy.